Hey, this is Cortland Sutton,
Hey, this is Tim Patrick.
and you're listening to The Snap
with Sidney Jones
on Broncos.
Podcast Network. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of The Snap. I'm your host, Sidney Jones, and the Broncos will look to grab their third straight win on the Monday Night Football stage as they're set to face the Buffalo Bills. So joining me on this week's episode of The Snap to take a look at this matchup is ESPN Buffalo Bills reporter Alaina Getzenberg. Alaina, such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's turned into a really exciting game that the Bills and Broncos have coming up, so it's a perfect time to talk.
100%. I think it's going to be a really fun one on Monday night.
Yeah, it seemed like for a bit, it was like, oh, the Bills are doing really well and the Broncos are kind of struggling, and now it's turned into it could be a really interesting and cool game. So
100%. Yeah, how are things going up there in Buffalo? How's the season going for you so far?
When the Bills aren't doing well, it's a tough time to be in Buffalo, New York in general. So there's been some tough times. There's a lot of injuries here, but for me, it's good. This is my third season covering this team, and that's kind of when you get comfortable in the groove and stuff. So it's been really cool kind of knowing some of these guys for a bit longer now and that sort of thing. But it's been an up and down season, so there's definitely been a lot to cover. So
I feel you on that one, Elena. I can't believe it's already week 10. I mean, we're already halfway done with the season. I guess more than halfway done.
Yeah, it goes by so fast. When it was actually November, I was like, wait, what?
I know.
The whole season goes by so quickly. But yeah, it's crazy and past the halfway mark. So it's kind of exciting to see. There's so much still to happen though, right? I feel like even though we're halfway through, yeah, there's so much that can still change. So it's been an interesting one so far.
Definitely. Elena, looking at the Bills side of this matchup, it feels like the main topic of conversation out there this week is, the fact that the Bills, they're looking to find a spark, after starting the season 5-4, coming off that loss in Cincinnati. Elena, what do you think's been, I guess, the reason for some of the inconsistency up there, and how do you think they'll look to fix that on Monday night?
I think they are still trying to find the answer to that question, where that inconsistency is coming from. And I think that's part of the problem, where it's if you're trying to find the answer to that question, it means that it's a big question. It means there's probably more things happening than just one simple answer. And I think that's been part of the frustration. Is it'd be great if it was if we did this, it would all be fixed and go away. And that just hasn't been the case. But there's been flashes, and I think that's where the encouragement has to come from, and they kind of have to build off what has gone well, because they put together some drives and it's okay, great, more of that, and then they go away from what they were doing to be successful. So there's tones, and of course, whenever you have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs on a football field, the offense has opportunities, but they kind of still have to put it all together, and they haven't been able to do that for a whole game very much at all this season. So that's what kind of worth keeping an eye on and seeing if they could actually do that. They do always play better at home, which helps. Whenever they're in Orchard Park, it's a little bit, the performance tends to go up a little bit. So,
well, I know I saw reports this week that running back Latavius Murray, he held that players only meeting with the offense out there. What do you feel like came out of that?
I think it's one of those things where it's interesting that it was offense only, because I think that's where it's more okay, what are we doing? This unit specifically, what can we do to be held more accountable? And I think the general tone was just let's get on the same page. Let's make sure we're all understanding, what can we do for each other? What can we be communicating better? It's interesting that it was Latavius Murray, because he's only been here for a couple months, really. I mean, he was a new addition this off season, so he's someone that is already, but obviously he's been around the league and seen a lot of different teams. So for him to step up in that way was really interesting. And he's not a team captain. This is his first season, but for him to step up and kind of make a statement, something Sean McDermott really liked, and whether it'll pay off, I think that's still to be seen. But it's one of those where I think that's flashy and sometimes people can overreact. But I think the focus of it was just communicating and making sure that they were still all locked in and had that confidence in each other.
For sure. And, Latavius Murray was on the Broncos last year, and I'm not surprised that he's already a leader out there, because he came in here, a couple weeks into the season last year and kind of put the team on his back and was a leader here too. Yeah, for sure. Elena, you mentioned Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs earlier. I know Stephon Diggs, he was added to the injury report on Friday, was limited at practice with that back injury. What's kind of the latest on him? What did Coach McDermott say about him?
Yeah, we haven't really heard nothing from Coach McDermott. Hasn't talked since that happened. So we're kind of still waiting to see. I did see Stephon Diggs coming off the practice field yesterday, and he seemed like his normal self, but that doesn't mean
Right.
things can still happen and pop up. So we're gonna have to see on that. He has not missed a game as a Buffalo Bill. So, I think maybe not overreacting to it too much, but certainly he is arguably, I mean, he's definitely Josh Allen's favorite weapon and, someone who's very important to this team. So the fact that even if he's, playing on Monday, the fact that he's dealing with something is worth keeping an eye on and keeping a reminder on, because he is that important to this team on the field. And then also he's a team captain and he's one of the big leaders on this team as well. So it's definitely something whenever Stefon Diggs' name pops up on an injury report, it's worth paying attention to. But I did see him walking off the practice field as well. So there's some positive note there.
Well, there's been a lot of conversation out here this week in Denver just about quarterback Josh Allen, how impressive he is, how dynamic he is as a quarterback. I know head coach Sean Payton said that, he's earned all the respect that he has in this league. Elena, from your opinion, what's been your evaluation of just his performance so far this season?
It's been up and down. I think he's had some really great moments. I think when you see he has those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, that's, no one else can do that. And then
Right.
he has those moments where it's like, ooh, maybe you shouldn't have thrown that, and that sort of thing. So it's kind of, up and down, but I do think overall it's interesting because he's kind of had to transform his game some and adjust some things. So so I think overall good, but some things that they're still trying to iron out and figure out.
Mm-hmm. I know the Bills have been dealing with a ton of injuries on defense. So what's kind of the latest of some of those guys there? And, who do you expect to maybe step up that this Broncos offense should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, they are piling up. They have 3 starters on the defensive side on injured reserve. And then they also have Micah Hyde dealing with a neck and a stinger this week. And he's very important to the back end of that defense.
Right.
And then starting cornerback Christian Benford is also, hamstring injury. He hasn't practiced all week either. Neither of them have. And they're very important to this defense. So they're going to be looking to a couple guys to step up. In the back end, some quarterbacks they brought in, Rasul Douglas at the trade deadline. He's going to start. I mean, he's in line to start this week. And that's how much of a big trade deadline acquisition he was.
Mm-hmm.
And at safety, they've got a bunch of guys they are going to have to contribute there, because replacing Micah Hyde is not an easy task. They signed Taylor Rapp in the offseason, and he'll definitely help out there. They've got Cam Lewis, who's a backup defensive back who can play a lot of different positions. And then wouldn't be surprised if Damar Hamlin is active this week, probably in more of a special teams role, but they need that safety depth if Micah Hyde can't play. So they're kind of grasping at straws from all over the place, because they're now going to be down probably a couple more starters for this game. And it's already a defense that's been dealing with a lot of issues.
Yeah. Going back to Stefon Diggs, I feel like looking at this matchup, you would think that the matchup to watch for was going to be Stefon Diggs versus Broncos cornerback Pat Surtain. But, if Stefon's not able to go, Elena, what do you think, I guess, just the matchup to watch will be then?
That's a great question, because the Bills really have struggled at that number 2 wide receiver role to have someone step up. But really, who's having a great 3-game stretch is rookie tight end Dalton Kincaid, who they drafted in the first round. And he's a tough matchup for most cornerbacks because he's a big dude. And I think sometimes he can be hard to defend because the Bills use him in so many different ways. He can play the slot, he can line up outside, he can do a lot of different things. So he's someone who, if even if Stefon Diggs is out there, that can be a matchup problem, just because he's really catching his groove. Josh Allen has more trust in him now, and he's in line to break a bunch of records, for rookie tight ends, especially with the Bills, but also league wide, just because how much production he's had as of late. So he's definitely someone to keep an eye on.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I feel like, both of these teams are really looking to stack some wins here. And, the Broncos are seen as underdogs, given the success that the Bills have really had in recent years. But, I think this is going to be a lot closer of a game than people think. Like you said earlier, I think this is going to be a really fun matchup to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where the Bills have had trouble scoring early in games. And honestly, I think if they can put up a couple touchdowns, I think maybe then there could be, especially at home, whenever you're at home and you can get up early, it's hard. But I think if the Broncos can keep the Bills' first half offensive struggles going, I agree with you. I think this game is way closer than some people think.
I think so too. And this Broncos defense has really stepped up in the past couple weeks here. So it'll be a fun one to watch. Elena, I can't thank you enough for your insight on the matchup. But before you go, I want to switch gears for a little bit. As many of my listeners know, here on the Snap, one of my main goals is to highlight women's impact in and around the NFL. So I want to ask you about your career. To start, for those who may not know, what does your role with ESPN entail exactly?
Yeah, so my job is to cover the Bills. I live in Buffalo, New York, which sometimes people get really confused by because like, oh, you work for ESPN and like you live in Connecticut.
Oh,
No,
right.
I'm yeah, I'm based in Buffalo. I live here full time, 100% of the time. And so I cover the Bills. So that's writing for ESPN.com, all sorts of stories, whatever's happening with the Bills. And then it's also doing TV and online videos. So if they need something on the Bills for SportsCenter or one of our shows, like I'll do that as well. So, or if it's hopping on an ESPN podcast, I do that too. So it's kind of like all sorts of platforms, Bills related, like for ESPN, and that comes in so many different forms because there's a lot of different platforms out there and a lot of ways you can create media. So it's come in a lot of different ways, but focused on the Bills. And then sometimes I pitch in with a couple other things that are happening in Buffalo, which it's not the busiest sports city, but I got to help with the NCAA men's basketball tournament was here and I got to help with that. And then the Sabres are here too. So yeah, so that's basically what I do.
You mentioned earlier, this is your third year in this role. So I guess what's been your favorite part of the role and maybe the most challenging as well?
That's a great question. I could say the most challenging has been for me learning how to do television. That is something I did not have a background in. I have a background as a writer. So for me, it was like, okay, like, how do I do this? How do you be on TV? How do you do all that? So that's been a challenge for me, but it was something I've genuinely enjoyed because it's like a really cool skill to have, and something that when I do it right, it's like great, like it's really, yeah, it's exciting. So that's been the challenge. And I think something I've really enjoyed or that's been rewarding has been like kind of like we were talking about earlier, like when you're on a beat and you feel like you're really getting that comfortable, like you're feeling more knowledgeable in what you're talking about. It just takes time. Like it can't like replace time. There's nothing you can do to like make it go faster or change that. And I think it's been really cool to like, this is such a passionate city about their football team. It's unlike I've covered a couple other NFL teams. I've been around different sports, but like this is like a college town, but for an NFL team. And it's really cool. And it's cool to be like in a place where people really care and getting that comfort and understanding the history and current state of this team and kind of getting to see if they can get past this Super Bowl barrier that they haven't been able to and get to cover that has been a really cool and unique experience.
Yeah. Can you kind of walk me through the path that you took to get to where you are today in this position?
Yeah, it's very not straightforward at all. It's been kind of not linear, but basically I kind of fell in love with this in college. I went to UC Berkeley or Cal, depending on how you know it, but they're the same school. So I worked for the student newspaper there and like just fell in love with sports reporting, and did a variety of internships while I was there and kind of like made sure I was learning a bunch of different things. And then after college, I did an internship with MLB.com and I covered the St. Louis Cardinals, which was a really cool experience. Yeah, they care about their baseball. I can tell you that in St. Louis. And then I worked for CBS Sports for a bit and like went away from writing, which was like a good change for me because I got to see like what other forms of sports media there are. So it was more TV based, kind of behind the scenes though. So I got to see like how all of that is done. And then basically did a couple jobs back with newspapers in Dallas and then in Charlotte covering the Carolina Panthers. And then I made it here. So it's kind of been like, I've done a lot of jobs. I've lived in a lot of cities,
right?
But I've really gotten to see like different sides of sports media, which I think has been really helpful to me because it's like, okay, what do I like? What don't I like? It's good to know like how different people do their jobs because they're related to me as well. Like I know how things work in studio like now because I did it and that sort of thing. But yeah, so I kind of like found my way here, but it was not a straight line or like I didn't know this was my end goal, but it just kind of worked out that way. So yeah.
Well, to finish off the episode, I like to end just in inspiring the younger generation. So what's one piece of advice you'd give someone looking to get into the industry, really no matter what area of it they want to work in?
It's a great question because there's so
many
things. Yeah, there's so many things like where to start. I think one thing that if like my kind of path has taught me and like something I would like tell my younger self now, I think it would be like, don't put too much pressure on yourself, and that like it doesn't have to be like, okay, I have to do this to get to this. I think like it can be, there's a lot of pressure, I think, that sometimes when we're like, okay, especially women in sports media, like I need to have a certain level of experience to be like considered for this job or that job, and I have to do this so I can do this. And I think if I've learned anything, and like also other women in sports media that I've met, that like it's not perfectly linear. Like no one has the same path as me, or my friends, like my friend Catherine Fitzgerald covers the team for the Buffalo News, and her path's completely different from mine, but we both are covering the Bills and live in Buffalo. So I think there's no one path, and don't put too much pressure on like hitting certain things. Take a job that sounds cool to you and will get you good experience, and like take it from there. Like just don't overthink it and like be like, I have to do a certain job to get to a certain place. Allow yourself the flexibility to do a job that's appealing to you, and it'll take you where you're meant to go.
I love that. Perfect way to end the episode there. Elena, truly can't thank you enough for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Snap Broncos Country. Thanks so much for tuning in. And thank you again to our guest, Alaina Getzenberg, for joining the show. I'll see you all next week on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube following the game on Monday night.